The Outsider podcast shares the opinions and analyses of Drew Landry. They are his thoughts, and his thoughts alone, and do not necessarily reflect every member of his audience or newsletter readers. Now, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry. And folks, thank you so much for making this the best politics podcast west of I-35 in the Lone Star State. So however, whenever, and wherever you are listening and or watching, I'm actually live streaming this as I am recording this, please know that I am incredibly grateful for your attention. In today's episode, I have really two things that I want to discuss with you. And one of those items is the drama surrounding Kentucky's senior senator, Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is going to go down in history as one of the most powerful U.S. senators, and he has since no longer been in a leadership position for the last few years because of his advanced age. Let's also note that he's been struggling with his own health, and that has caused him to not be seen in over a month. But in mid-July, so maybe about 10 days or so ago, there was a photo that was released of him, and it also included his wife, and they were sitting down with a newspaper in hand, and he had his finger like pointing towards something, but people thought that that was supposed to be AI generated, but there hasn't really been any sort of evidence to suggest that it that it was. I mean, there's been some forensics to say no, that was a real picture. But that aside, that's supposed to mean that he's alive and well. And there's just one problem with that: no one has seen him. I mean, this is kind of like Woodrow Wilson here. After he suffered this massive stroke. He was confined to his room, and his second wife, Edith Wilson, was just basically saying, hand me the things and I'll go give it to him, and then you can have it. And it would turn out that only she knew how to get him to sign things. It was one of the weirdest moments in American history. And it seems like that's what's happening here, in that we're supposed to believe that Senator McConnell is alive and well, but we're not really supposed to question it. The truly wild part in all this is that there are some who are on the crazy left. And look, folks, I'm not going to get too far deep in the mud with this. There's the crazy right, all right, who also are the violent right. And then you have Republicans, then you have the center, then you have Democrats, and then you have the crazy left. The crazy left, who you really see go just all ballistic on social media, they want the Bluegrass State's governor, Andy Beshear, to do something. Like, it's almost as if they want him to seek him out. Like, I actually saw someone say that they wanted him to go to the hospital to see where he is, to see if he's truly alive. And if he is truly alive, say that he's alive. But if he isn't, then they want him to announce that his seat is vacant and appoint someone to fill it. Now, there's some problems with this, all right? And the problem with this is, you have those who say it's a clear cut and dry issue, that he can simply just appoint somebody and then let that be it. It's not entirely that way. First, we have to look, because I'm going to flesh this out, because I think it's needed to be fleshed out. And where we're going to start is with the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. And it reads, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislatures. All right, elected by the people. This, what the 17th Amendment is usually known for is ridding of the indirect election of U.S. senators and making it a direct election by the people. That's what everyone usually takes away from it, but that's Section 1. Here's Section 2. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies, provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election as the legislature may direct. And then the last part here says that this amendment shall not be construed as to affect the election of any term of a senator chosen before it becomes valid as part of the Constitution. So I just want to spend just a couple more moments here on the second section. So, when vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancy, provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election as the legislature may direct. Okay, so what you're saying here is that the governor can make a special election for, there is no can, that he or she will make special elections for those vacancies. Let alone the fact that if the legislature of the state, it may also empower the executive to appoint somebody. Okay? So it's kind of like saying you will have an election, but the legislature may grant you the ability to make appointments. All right. So that's the first part here. Now we have to look at what's called Section 152 of the Section 152 of the Kentucky Constitution. And I have it right here. It's a bit of a long paragraph, but stick with me. It says, except as otherwise provided in this Constitution, vacancies in all elected offices shall be filled by election or appointment as followed. If the unexpired term will end at the next succeeding annual election at which either city, town, county, district, or state offices are to be elected, the office shall be filled by appointment for the remainder of the term. If the unexpired term will not end at the next succeeding annual election, which the same offices as prior are to be elected, and if 3 months intervene before said succeeding annual election, at which either all the others I just mentioned earlier, city, town, county, district, or state offices are to be elected, the office shall be filled by appointment until said election. And then said vacancy shall be filled by election for the remainder of the term. If 3 months do not intervene between the vacancy and the next election, those officers are to be elected. The office shall be filled by appointment until the second succeeding annual election at which city, town, are to be elected. And then if any part of the term remains unexpired, the office shall be filled by election until the regular time for the election of officers to fill said offices. So that's a mouthful. So what that does is that it set up the parameters on appointments and special elections and all that for vacancies for the state. Here's the part where everybody gets hung up. Vacancies in all offices for the state at large, or for districts larger than a county, shall be filled by appointment of the governor. All other appointments shall be made as may be prescribed by law. no person shall ever be appointed a member of the General Assembly. The vacancies therein, that's nice. Okay. So that was the point that people are often making here. This sentence right here: vacancies in all offices for the state at large or for districts larger than a county shall be filled by appointment of the governor. And all other appointments shall be made as may be prescribed by law. So you have the 17th Amendment that says that the executive authority shall issue writs of special elections to fill vacancies, and that the legislature of any state can empower the executive to make appointments. Okay? Interesting. And then you have here Section 152 of the Kentucky Constitution, that where people are really hammering in on is that the vacancies in all offices for the state at large, shall be filled by appointment of the governor. Okay. Now here's the other part that we have to remember, because we're almost to the big part here. There's a Kentucky law. There's a Kentucky law that was passed in 2021. Okay. And where it restructured the governor's appointment power. The governor could appoint someone, but only from a list of names from the departing senator's party. Then there was one from 2024 that it actually removed. So this is from 2 years ago. The legislature removed the governor's appointment power entirely. Now vacancies must be filled by special election, not by gubernatorial appointment. Governor Beshear vetoed that bill. The legislature overrode it. So where we stand right now, according to Kentucky law, is that the governor can no longer make these appointments, and that any sort of vacancy would trigger an election. But here's the thing we also need to remember here. You have Section 152, and then you have the 17th Amendment. So you have some very competing ideas of law in all of this, and it makes people quite confused. So now you can see where the whole debate and the whole conversation is. Now, people want Beshear to announce that McConnell's dead. Look, Governor Beshear is not a doctor. Only doctors get to decide if someone's dead, not the media, not a politician. So is it wrong that Mitch McConnell's office is withholding some information here because we think that they are? Absolutely, that's wrong. Absolutely. But I want to be clear that this whole thing is not clear cut. And I made a post about something like this on Threads, and it got a lot of attention. And I was saying, hey, look, he can't really do this. It's not really all that, it's not really what you think it is. And there were people who got into my replies and to tell me how dumb I am, and that's. I always appreciate those people. They're very, very kind. But look, I think Governor Beshear is going places, and he's finding his legs in a possible presidential run, and I hope he does that because I think he would make really the best candidate. All right, he's a governor from a historically red state. He's a governor with divided government. All right, a governor from the Midwest / Mid-South, whatever you want to think of it. And he's a guy that has a very high approval rating in a state that hasn't voted for a Democrat since Bill Clinton. So, you have to really think about this and the fact that you got to give governors who have experience in governing a better opportunity than what they've been afforded. Now, I think he'd be much better than California Governor Gavin Newsom. Newsom's a charismatic guy and all that, but he's he's been making moves that are clearly political. And then you have also former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who, look, I'm going to say this about Pete Buttigieg. He has a legit entitlement problem. Like, he feels like that he's entitled to this for some reason. He hasn't earned it. And I have my own issues with Buttigieg. I mean, he both of his parents were professors at Notre Dame. He went to a private school. He went to Harvard. He went to Oxford. Yeah, he served in the Navy. That's true. But then he became mayor of South Bend, and even that, his time as mayor was not good. I mean, it was marred by some weird controversy with a police officer, and then there was a police officer who killed who got into a shooting incident that later killed a black resident. Pete Buttigieg, as nice and as smart as he may be, has very little appeal to the black community. I've heard him say it. And so they're not exactly thrilled about someone like Secretary Pete, But I'll also go on this little tangent. Buttigieg is one of these politicians who doesn't want to have a tough election. He never ran for Congress. He actually ran, and people may not remember this, but he actually ran in 2010 for, this is when he lived in Indiana, for Indiana treasurer. Okay. Ran for state treasurer in a 2010 against Robert Murdoch. And he got beat. I mean, let's remember 2010 was a bad year for the Democrats. It was the big wave of the Tea Party, and you had everybody wanting to, be on the Tea Party and all this sort of stuff of 2010, that big wave election that seeped down to the states, and that essentially realigned the state of Indiana. That said, ever since then, Buttigieg was not really interested in doing anything difficult. He knew he could win in South Bend, so he ran for mayor for that. Great. But then he ran for president for some weird reason. I don't, he claimed that he won the state of Iowa. He won the Iowa caucus, and he didn't. But that was really the last time that really anything happened. And then he becomes, he endorses Biden, and then he becomes Secretary of Transportation. And look, being on cabinet is a great accomplishment for somebody. But Buttigieg is one of these people that when he was done with that, he didn't move back to Indiana. He's not working hard to build the infrastructure for the Indiana Democratic Party. He moved to Michigan. Okay? He moved to the Wolverine State because it's easier for him to live there because he wants to run for president. He was thought that maybe he would run for U.S. Senate in Gary Peters' seat, and he said no. Then there was thought that he was going to run for governor of Michigan because, Whitmer is term limited in Michigan, and he said no. Because he wants to, he's going to run for president in 2028. I think that is an absolutely disastrous decision for him. Sure, he's a good talker, but smart guy, not going to lie, but inspires zero. Always the person who seeks the easiest path, but tries to make it seem like it's the hardest path possible. There's a name for that. I'm not going to mention it here, but there's a name for that. I think Andy Beshear took on a hard challenge in Kentucky, and has done tremendous things for the progressive movement and done really good things for the state of Kentucky, during COVID. And, I've even seen Republicans say that, I may not always agree with what he did, but I think he did a pretty good job. If Kentucky Republicans are saying that, and he has a very high approval rating. Look, this is a guy who is really going places, and I hope his leadership style of divided government, because he has the ability to do that, because he's doing it now. People say he's a red state Democrat who has won. It's true, but I think that will resonate a lot more and better than Buttigieg's mountain out of a molehill list of accomplishments. He really likes to make something out of nothing and make hay out of that. But those who are piling on Governor Beshear because he's not forcing the issue over Mitch McConnell, I think you're biting off more than you can chew. You are asking for something that you don't really understand. This situation is very complex. It's very nuanced, and I think I'm of the mind that perhaps should McConnell be found that he's no longer alive, I think that would lead to Beshear making that appointment, and then he'll be sued for it, and then we'll find out. We'll have a lawsuit over this, and I think that's kind of where we're headed. I thought that from the very beginning. I had someone mention that to me on a social media. I think that's exactly what's bound to happen. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Give people the clarity of Section 152. And of the Kentucky Constitution, and how does that play into the 17th Amendment, and does that overrule the Kentucky law that he vetoed? I think that's an interesting fight to have. Separation of powers is good. Checks and balances is good. And the governor needs it too. All right. That said, now my other focus here has to do with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Yet again, I would love not to talk about this guy. But it is so difficult to not talk about this guy. Paxton is and forever will be a political lightweight. You might say, well, why do I say that? He's never lost an election, Drew. He's been a 3-time statewide elected official. How can you call that person a lightweight? Well, here's why. He's rode the coattails of other candidates. All right, he rode John Cornyn's coattails in 2014. Okay, he ran. He rode Ted Cruz's coattails in 2018. This is somebody who can't really do much on his own. And he's never led a ticket, not even once. And he continues to be a drag for the Republican Party. And let's also know that something that is rather, kind of funny, his fundraising capabilities speak to that. He has been significantly out fundraised by his Democratic rival, James Tallarico. Not like 2-1. Folks, we're talking 3-1. In that second quarter, Tallarico raised $30 million. Paxton raised $9 million. And the big guns here, and what I mean by the big guns is Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, and Grandpa Munster, Senator Ted Cruz, are essentially trying to woo these donors from John Cornyn. And so far, it has not worked. We're seeing here that a lot of the people from Cornyn are very, very timid about wanting to donate to him. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that he's so lightweight. He's so minor league. There's someone, I'm just going to quote this story here from the Houston Chronicle. It says, a longtime Republican political operative noted that Paxton has never ran a federal race, and so it's a matter of who he knows. The guy said, third-party groups are going to be the ones to drive the fundraising and the expenditures. That's true. And Paxton wants a set of protection because they all, neither President Trump nor Greg Abbott want to be in office when Texas loses its first statewide Democratic seat in over 30 years. Okay? They don't want to deal with that. And so, and with a recent Supreme Court ruling that states for national groups that they can spend more and coordinate directly with campaigns, this is solely going to help out Ken Paxton, you would think. And you constantly see how the Republican National Committee has far outraised the Democratic side of it, and that could probably help buoy Paxton's fundraising capabilities. But we got to be clear here. You would think that would be very helpful, but I'm not entirely sure that's going to really take place here, because Paxton he's going to fundraisers. Ted Cruz is trying to help him out here. The people are just kind of like, I don't think I really want to give to Paxton. And while they're not Paxton will publicly say that they're not worried about this. They do right here in the article from the Houston Chronicle. And this is what it says here. Ken Paxton raised more in this cycle than any other non-incumbent Republican Senate candidate, said one of his senior advisors. So that's fine, But the Cornyn people are, the big Cornyn donors are timid, are very scared to want to give to Paxton because he's not a disciplined candidate. He's very arrogant. And that is making them balk at the idea of forking over so many millions of dollars. Now, that hasn't stopped people like, Cowboys owner Jerry Jones from giving to him, and also Texas Tech Board of Regents chair Cody Campbell. Both of these two gentlemen, all due respect to them, are problems within themselves. Every Cowboys fan will tell you from here in Timbuktu that Jerry Jones is the problem with the Dallas Cowboys. And Cody Campbell he's just inserted himself into this whole controversy around Brendan Sorsby, and gambling and funding of college sports. And he's just embroiled himself in that. You talk about a giant self-forced error. That's just ridiculous. But what I think is even more telling of all that is the career. I shouldn't say the career, is the campaigning that Paxton is doing. Because they're all trying to land some sort of an attack on a James Tallarico. Like, for real. They're all trying to land some big knockout punch. Some right uppercut, some sort of a left stick, left jab, trying to land something on him. And most of these attacks that they're trying here are incredibly uncreative and so dumb. And now he's going back to the drawing board. You remember what they're saying, your low T, low T Jimmy or whatever, Talafrico, like, okay. All those things that have been said about him have not exactly worked. There are people who are buying shirts that are saying Talafrico on it. You've only helped them out. Then you had other publications saying how, well, James Talarico follows women on Instagram. And? Now they're saying that he's a fake Christian. I've never heard a candidate say more about Jesus than James Talarico and actually quote these things and make it meaningful into the campaigns, yet somehow that means that he's fake. All that I hear from Ken Paxton is that he said something about faith. I want to talk about faith. Dude, you are the last person to talk about faith. Now, I believe he probably meant the dancer at a club that he probably wasn't supposed to go to. But I just, and that's the other thing about the Paxton campaign. Even his surrogates are throwing everything but the kitchen sink at Talarico. And they continually miss the mark. Governor Abbott is throwing things about him. Well, he said this and all that, and he said this, 6 years ago, and Lieutenant Governor Patrick said that he looks like somebody who can't really lift 90 pounds. And then you got Ted Cruz over here, who he's got no room to say anything. I mean, the very moment that things get tough, Ted Cruz goes on vacation. So, and Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is 77 years old, and he hasn't been feeling well for some time, and so he looks pathetic. If there's anyone who's going to say anything about physical fitness, it is not Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Okay? Let's also know this. Abbott is so obsessed with Talarico that he hasn't mentioned one time his actual opponent. At least I haven't found it. Gina Hinojosa, state representative out of Austin. And so you think about this, and he's taken up all the oxygen, yet they keep missing. All the attacks that they've had on him just simply don't land. They are just so lame. And I have to say this. I'm not always about political attacks, but being able to land one really speaks to the expertise of a campaign. You have to land a couple of solid punches here. And if you can't, then what are you doing? Paxton's campaign and his surrogates are so weak. They are so weak. They can't even promote the candidate. I've never heard Paxton say, I'm going to do this for you. He will say that how he's pro-law enforcement, even though that's a laugh. How can you be pro-law enforcement and then at the same time be caught committing voter fraud? And then whenever you're throwing that into your face, you just say, I'm not going to answer questions about that. What? If your job is, if you're enforcing the law on voter fraud and then you break the law on voter fraud, you should answer a question about law enforcement on voter fraud. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about it. All that they say, all that Paxton and his surrogates are saying is that somehow Talarico is weird. That's it. And then they go to all the fringe things. They want men playing in women's sports, and they want open borders, and they want to take all your guns. All this malarkey. That's all that it is. They can't come up with anything else. They have these tired, rehearsed lines that they've been saying for years, and they keep saying it over and over and over and over and over again. That's really the old Republican tactic. Doesn't matter if it's true. If I keep saying it and repeating it, and if everyone else repeats it, then it will somehow become true. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. If I keep saying that there's no place like home, eventually I'll be home. This is such a weird mindset. That's a thought. But it's not working. These types of things are simply not working. I think that's just hilarious because this is supposed to be the big race. Everyone's got their eyes on Texas, and I can understand why. It's been 8 years since the Democrat has had a real chance of winning a Senate seat. And the way the polling has been done, Tallarico is leaps and bounds ahead of where Beto O'Rourke was 8 years ago, especially when it comes to fundraising. Leaps and bounds ahead of O'Rourke. And here's the other big thing here that people are just automatically ignoring. It's quite clear that Cornyn and Paxton haven't really made up. And I'm not saying that they have to, but what I'm saying is Paxton has to at least make an effort to go to those places where John Cornyn is popular and people respect him and talk about that. He's not even made an effort. Tallarico has with the Crockett people. With those who, and what I mean by that are those who voted for Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman Crockett, in the Democratic primary back in March. That was a competitive primary. For a lot of Democrats, there were those who loved both of them, hated the fact you had to pick one. But that's just the way primaries work. When you have two solid candidates, one of them has to win and one of them has to lose. And Tallarico has said, it's not Jasmine Crockett's job to help me win. I'm the candidate. I have to do it. And he's showing up to places and he's listening and he's answering questions, and they're not exactly fun adventures because there are people who are not entirely thrilled about him. But at least he's showing up. For the Republicans, Paxton is just, he's showing up in England. Now, he's in D.C. trying to get money. Or he's hanging out with a bunch of sheriffs trying to say how he's pro-law enforcement, but except when it comes to him and his voter fraud. That's what this is. And so all of these particular attacks that Paxton has been using here, that he thought were good to use with Cornyn, and he just automatically assumed that the Cornyn people would be right behind him all the time, because that's, for a lot of time, that's how it's worked in Texas, especially among Texas Republicans. But this is a whole different landscape. Ken Paxton is out of his league. Again. And it needs to be said that Paxton, because he can't shore up his own set of supporters, he feels like if he attacks the Democrat, then they'll all just come and hold their nose and vote for him. That's a thought. Talk radio's doing that, as I said earlier. I live out here in West Texas. That's all I hear. That's a lot of things that I hear. It's the same old attacks on anybody who is a Democrat. Men and women's sports, open borders, take your guns, all this crap. They got nothing else. And so they're doing the campaigning for Paxton for him, in hopes that people will come from that side, that they won't sit out. So these attacks, though, that that they're using here, these old tired attacks, these old non-landing attacks, these punches where they end up just like hitting his shoulder, hitting Tallarico's shoulder, or they miss completely. It's just a complete whiff, just aren't working. But please let the philandering, voter fraud committing, and pedophile protecting Attorney General continue his attacks on his opponent. All that it does is that it makes him look incredibly desperate. Folks, that's all from me today. Thank you so much for listening in on the show. There's no video today for this week, except for those who are watching me on the live stream. Had a few things, had a big thing happen over the week. I just wasn't feeling like being on camera for you to watch, and all that. So, audio is going to have to work for you this time. I do have a special guest coming up in 2 weeks, and I'm very excited about that. I'll talk more about it next episode. But I do want to thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. And look, and I throw this out here. I mean, if you want to talk politics with me, you want to join the show and you want to do this, shoot me an email, the.outsider806@gmail.com. That's the.outsider806@gmail.com. And I will really talk to anybody on the political spectrum. Again, I will have to keep it to the political side because, I've gotten some emails that aren't really exactly on the political side. This is a political show, right? This is the whole political podcast. So, sometimes I'll throw in some sports and some personal things, but by and large, this is more political than anything else. So if you have a talking dog who wants to talk about politics, let's get Lassie on the show. Why not? But again, folks, thank you so much for watching and or listening, and I'll see you again very, very, very soon.
The preceding analyses and opinions were that of Drew Landry and his alone. They did not necessarily reflect all of his podcast listeners or newsletter readers. Thank you for listening to the Outsider Podcast. Be sure to follow The Outsider on X and on Facebook. Also, don't forget to sign up to be a free subscriber to his newsletter on Substack. Just look for The Outsider. We will see you again next time.